All right, hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick Millikin from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we have a rare treat today. We have two of my absolute favorite authors and two of my favorite human beings as well. We have Neal Griffin here on the screen, who has,
Hey everybody.
just has a terrific new book called The Burden of Truth, which we're going to talk about. Real amazing piece of work. And James Carlos Blake, who's kind of one of my heroes and one of Neal's heroes, is on his way up from Tucson. I was going to say this will be our first partial live event that we've had in several months since all this craziness happened. But James is running a little late, so I hope he's okay. But hopefully he'll come waltzing in just a few minutes. But he has a wonderful new book out as well called The Bones of Wolf, and just an incredible body of work that we'll talk to him about. A couple of years ago, Mr. Blake was here for an event, and it was such a memorable evening because Neal drove all the way over from San Diego to meet Mr. Blake, and another author, a good friend of everybody here, is J. Todd Scott, and he was down that night, and we just had a terrific evening and went out for tacos afterwards. Just a great night. So anyway, Neal, let me give you the college try at a formal introduction. I've kind of morphed it into my own version of your bio. Let's see. During his 27-year career in law enforcement, Neal Griffin worked as a patrol cop, field training officer, member of SWAT, hostage negotiator, narcotics investigator, gang enforcement specialist, and supervisor of a homicide unit. He was named Officer of the Year on 2 occasions. In July 2016, Neal retired as the senior lieutenant of a 150 officer department. Neal holds a bachelor's degree from California State University, San Marcos, and is a graduate of the prestigious FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia, where he studied police ethics and forensic science. Neal is an adjunct professor at Palomar College in San Marcos, California, where he teaches police ethics and patrol procedures. He's also the author of 4 exquisitely written crime novels, including the brand new book I just mentioned, Burden of Truth. And so again, it's a real pleasure to have you here, Neal.
Thank you, Patrick. And first off, I'd like to say thank you so much. You guys didn't see it, but for the last 10 minutes, Patrick has been jumping through some technical hoops, trying to work through a bandwidth issue. So sorry about the little bit of a late start. And this would certainly be a lot easier if I could just be walking in from the Valley Ho, which is a block away. And we've always had such a great time at the Poison Pen. And yes, you're right, getting an opportunity to meet James Carlos last year was wonderful. So I'll be glad when things are normal again. But thanks so much for the invitation. Thanks for all the independent bookstores are doing to, maintain that connection between writers and readers. I don't know where right now we'd be without you, other than even more isolated than we already are as writers, right?
Yeah, it's such a weird, bizarre time. But it's funny. We've been, as you know from watching some of our programs, we've been we're making the best of it. We really are.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And I'm actually enjoying these a lot, because sometimes, we have more of a captive audience at home on the internet, people that are working from home. And sometimes in the discussions, what I really like about this format is that it gives us the opportunity to kind of get into some interesting byways that we might not, in a live event. So it's kind of fun.
Absolutely, and I was able to invite in friends from Wisconsin and North Carolina, and so that's great. Yeah, it's these are. I'm getting used to it. Like I said, I've told people all along, I grew up on Star Trek, so I always waited for this opportunity to have this kind of communication, right? I wouldn't say I'm over it. Yeah. I still enjoy the personal contact a little better, but this is working out pretty well, actually.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about your new book, and wow, quite a story. Can you talk? The main story of this character, Omar Ortega, who is just one of these gentlemen, as you describe throughout the book, and in the back, in kind of the afterword. One of these gentlemen who's kind of caught between both worlds, and kind of slips through the system, unfortunately. Can you just talk a little bit about the book and sort of what inspired you to write it?
Absolutely. I think that you're absolutely right. Omar is, well, first off, I would say this about Omar Ortega, and as anxious as I have been to present his story to the world, it's been ruminating in my head for a lot of years, because I've met, Omar is a fictional character. He is purely fiction, but I have met dozens of young men just like Omar. And under the best of circumstances, I would meet them in situations where we were able to, establish some kind of rapport, some sort of opportunity for friendship. We worked together in the neighborhoods, that sort of thing. But other times I met men like Omar, and it would be across the table in an interrogation room, and they would be trying to explain to me how they wound up in that car or on that street corner, and their explanation would very often get them sent to jail, and sometimes on to state prison, and some of them are still there. And I think that I want people to recognize that there are thousands of young men like Omar that live in urban environments in this country that are doing everything they can to walk that hazardous middle lane of barrio street justice, right? Where like you said, the cops are on the one side thinking they see Omar and they see a bad actor, and then the gangsters are on the other side thinking, why isn't that kid jumped in yet? Why isn't he putting in the work and paying the tax? So he's on that knife's edge, kind of a zero-sum game, if you will, and there's just not a lot of margin for error. So those are the young men that I met on a regular occasion, and I was really anxious to, personify it through Omar and do my best to write. I know that that's somewhat of a controversial subject, but I didn't. Obviously, I can write as a cop pretty well, but writing as a 19-year-old Latino boy was a little bit more challenging.
Just kind of for the benefit of the people that are watching, tell us a little bit about, specifically where this story is set, and also a little bit about his family and how they are kind of in the circumstances that they're in right now.
Sure. Without giving too much away, I mean, obviously, all the books I've written so far were always based in a small fictional town in Wisconsin. And in the most recent book, the Newburgh series, and in the last book of that, a young man by the name of Travis Jackson, who's a very good police officer. He worked in Newburgh, but he had decided that, as in Travis's words, he wanted to go run with the big dogs, if you will. So in the end of that book, he's putting in an application for San Diego San Diego Sheriff's Department, and he's actually accepted. So 2 years have gone by, and now Travis is here, and he's working for the sheriff's office in San Diego County. And he's stationed out of a little town called Vista. But I think what's interesting, or one of the interesting things about Travis, is he doesn't actually live in Vista. He doesn't have anything to do with Vista. The only connection he has to Vista is a badge and a gun. He comes down from the suburbs up in Riverside County. He drives down 4 days a week. He doesn't shop in Vista. He doesn't live in Vista. His kids don't go to school in Vista. So his only connection is his policing. And that's true of about 60% of law enforcement officers in America these days. There's not that community connection that really can be quite valuable. So Travis's view is, I come in here, I do my job, and I go home. But I don't mean to say he's not a good cop. He is a great cop. He's very conscientious. He's working hard. And his and Omar, they're on a collision course, if you will. And this kind of like with Ben Sawyer, the benefit of the doubt, this is sort of a road to redemption for Travis Jackson, and trying to see this case all the way through to the finish.
Well, and his wife and kids, it's the classic. Part of it's the classic thing we hear about as civilians. The workaholic tendency, or just, I don't know. I'll ask you this: is it really workaholism, or is it just the demands of the job are such that he has a hard time separating the two worlds, and gets in and out of balance?
Yeah.
Because he really does.
Yeah. No, I can say for sure it's not only about the work, the amount of work, because in a place like, in a city like Vista, a patrol cop who's really doing their job, that 10-hour shift is more typically 12 or 13, and it is a work that just really draws you in. So Travis is in a situation where his wife and his kids are feeling somewhat alienated. So he has his own family issues, but you did bring up the matter of Omar, because Omar, here he is, he's getting along pretty well. And I don't think this is giving too much away, but at some point, Omar's life is it's a zero-sum game, as I said. There's not much that, in terms of protection in his lifestyle. So when something like what happened in Omar's family, is his father was deported, and that was just had a cascading effect of what security they did have, what ability they did have for a stable life, was deported with him. And now Omar is trying to step up and trying to be the man of the house, if you will. He's got plans to join the army. He's got plans to move his family out of the barrio. But then one night everything goes wrong.
Yeah, and this is also very early on in the book, so we're not really spoiling anything. But when we meet Omar and his family, he and his sister Sophia and his younger brother Hector and his mother are living in not just a one-bedroom apartment, but one room in an apartment with a real kind of a sleaze bag.
Yeah.
And they're crammed into one room. And as I say, this is at the very beginning of the book where you learn this, what his circumstances are. And, Omar is taking care of business, he's going to school, he's making straight A's. He has a plan.
He does.
And, a recurring riff in this book, I really like the title because it has multiple different layers of meaning. But there's this is a very timely book on lots of different levels. When kind of this focus is on the police, and as I read in the introduction, you've served some of your time in looking at police oversight and ethics and things like that. And of course, a lot of that plays into this book. And on a kind of a deeper level, it implicates us all. How guilty are we all of our own judgment, our own snap judgment, and
Sure.
we all have prejudice. So can you talk a little bit about kind of that theme that's the quick to judge, and again, I'm walking a fine line of not spoiling stuff.
Sure.
But
I think you're right on the money, Patrick, because certainly I think most writers would agree that really what you're trying to do when you create a story like this is to do just that, is to challenge people's assumptions about what it is they think they already know. In fact, the more bedrock that assumption is, the more successful you feel as a writer. So for someone to open this book, and in the first 5 pages, when you meet Omar and he's crawled up on the bathroom floor and he's on the business end of a no-knock SWAT raid, you think, man, this guy must be a pretty bad dude. And he's on page 5, he's arrested for being a cop. So like I said, that's the way the story opens. But then you meet the real Omar, and you meet the Omar who is, as we said, doing his best to take care of his family, which is in kind of a free fall disaster situation. So I think that's a really great insight, and I do think that the rush to judgment by cops or by the public or by the courts, particularly when people are of limited means and don't have a lot of access to the proper defense, that's something that happens a lot in this country, and I think that having that conversation is a good one.
And in the background, we get a real sense of contemporary San Diego and just how much has changed, in the last, 20 years, less maybe?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The population has just kind of skyrocketed, has it not?
Right. Well, I think when I got here and to start my police career in 1989, I think the population of Vista was 15,000. I'm pretty sure now it's pushing 100,000. And that growth has been at times more well managed and at times not so well managed. So every city in San Diego has doubled in size in the last 10 or 15 years. Whereas I go back to places in Wisconsin where I grew up, and they've grown incrementally since I was there in the 70s.
Right. You talk a little bit about how before. I think of places like Pacific Beach or Ocean Beach, and these sort of tranquil kind of hippie communities, and I think somewhere you mentioned that they evoke these images of a Beach Boys kind of world.
Yeah,
and that's
right.
And much of that is gone now, is it not?
Yeah, I have to agree. There still is a beautiful county. The beaches are gorgeous. Winslow writes about it so well. And, yeah, it's just so yeah. It's still, boy, it's still a great place to work and a great place to be a cop, but it's definitely it's gotten a little crowded. Sure.
Now, I understand, and just from talking to you and from reading in the book, that your wife and can you talk a little bit about her influence, not just in telling this particular story, but in shaping your perspective and your worldview? It's a unique, perhaps puts you at odds with some of the other law enforcement, I would imagine.
Oh, well, I'm glad you brought that up because that's absolutely the case, particularly with this story. I alluded to trying to write as a young Latino man and growing up in a situation of an urban environment like that. And I don't think that I could have written it with the level that it would have resonated with. My understanding, or the feedback I'm getting, that it is actually resonating with people very well. I don't think I could have done that if I hadn't had the opportunity for the last 15 plus years to in my relationship with my wife, Olga Diaz, who is a first generation Latina, whose parents immigrated from Mexico. And Olga was born up in Salinas, really hard knocking town. Her dad worked the fields, her mom worked in a fish processing plant, and she showed up at school not speaking any English at all. So she was definitely in a situation where it wouldn't have taken much for that family to cascade into some sort of craziness as Omar's family did. And in fact, they did have a lot of issues growing up, those sorts of things. Her relationship with the police is completely different than mine. And on top of that, she's, at this point, she's had to fight her way through a lot of different situations, but she ended up at Santa Clara University. She wound up working for Price Waterhouse. She's a 3-term elected official. So, but as I said, she had to fight for every bit of it. And I think seeing that, definitely her fingerprints are all over this book. And the life that I've been able to kind of live vicariously through her and the causes that she's been involved in are definitely a big influence on this book.
So you were already well into your law enforcement career when you guys met and got married? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, I was. I was her first customer at her coffee shop when she opened a coffee house here in North County, San Diego. And yeah.
It's all starting to come together, Neal. The coffee house in the first book.
Yeah, you remember that, huh? Well, it's funny is then about it was a few years into our marriage, and she decided she was going to run for local office. So all of a sudden, the cop was married to a politician. That's when I really started getting interested.
Well, I guess the reason I brought it up also was just this adds another wrinkle to it. Did you find that before you and Olga met and got to know each other, did your attitude as a police officer change much, or did your worldview just kind of expand?
Well, I would like to give myself some credit in that area. Is that growing up in a house that we really revered books. My father was a college professor, and books were very important to us from a very early age. And I tell a story often because it's an enduring story about my dad that is just a very clear memory in my head. Probably 15 years old in Wisconsin and reading whatever the latest Stephen King novel was. And my dad, like a lot of people back then particularly, were somewhat judgmental of his brand of literature. And he pulled the book out of my hand and he stuck the book, Native Son by Richard Wright. He said, read this instead. And I did. And that, by the way, is a pretty great murder mystery, if you will. It's a great, some great chase scenes. It's a phenomenal book, but it's also a book about the experience of African Americans, particularly in the 1940s, during what's called the Great Migration, when they were leaving the South in droves. But that caused me to read another book by Wright, which was Blackwood, his autobiographical material from a teenager. So bottom line is, I've always liked to think that because of the way I was, my father in particular, exposed us to different ideas, challenging our own assumptions, if you will, that I had some tendency to be a little bit more open-minded. But all that said, yes, it's when I began a relationship with Olga and knowing what she had been through in terms of her own history and her family's history with law enforcement and the courts, and coming down here and really representing people who are in a very difficult situation. And in fact, this town has not always been very friendly to the Latino population, and in fact has targeted the Latino population in the past with special laws about renting property and parking cars and all sorts of things. And it was always my wife that was leading the fight in those areas to combat that sort of thing.
Right.
So yeah, I think like I said, her fingerprints are all over the book, and she definitely changed my worldview for sure.
Now, I'm hoping our friend James Carlos Blake will walk in any moment.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you. About the epigraph to the book. Violence is the most elemental truth of life.
Yeah.
What a great quote. Yeah.
And if you read Blake, I mean, violence is the most elemental truth of life. Not love, not companionship, violence. And when you read his books, I think what he's trying to say, what he definitely portrays in a lot of his characters is there is that fine line in all of us where we can be. It doesn't matter what your background is. At some point, we all have that ability to snap, and for everybody, it's a different place. But and in this book, The Bones of Wolf, he just writes it. I think I'm calling it. I talked to him last week. I said I call it The Revenge of the Osprey. Remember that scene?
Yeah.
What a great scene, and what a way to just anyway. So the way he injects that human emotion, violence, into some really, I think, ways that you go, hey, that's right on, man. That was well written, and really just kind of a really great scene of how people can be pushed over the edge.
Yeah, and you wonder, you do wonder, does every one of us, do we have that potential, if under the right amount of stress,
Sure we do. Mm-hmm.
to snap? And I think a lot of people deny that they have that side of themselves, the shadow side.
Mm-hmm.
But it's there.
Absolutely. My contention is that everybody has that line, that called the line in the sand of your soul, if you will. And it's it might be for some people it's as simple as they've got something you want, or maybe just the idea of an opportunity to feel power in a life that's otherwise pretty powerless. But of course, as parents, we all know what we do to defend our children. Or you're asleep upstairs and you hear the shattering glass downstairs. So I think we all have that place in our life where we know that we would understand that violence is the most elemental truth.
Yeah. Become more and more fascinated lately with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That short novel. I mean, there's a lot going on in that. That maybe as a kid you don't realize. Sort of that shadow side that we all have.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit, for some of the viewers who are watching? I ran through sort of your brief credentials of your law enforcement career, but can you talk about what you did over the course of your career, and I don't know, maybe some of those details?
Yeah. Well, and any real law enforcement career, in my opinion, you should start at one place, and that is in the driver's seat of a marked municipal patrol vehicle. And I say that if you want to be an FBI agent, great. If you want to be a district attorney, a judge, a public defender, a narcotics officer, whatever it might be, the greatest place to start your career is sitting in a marked police vehicle in a uniform and interacting with the public. Spending that hopefully at least 3 to 5 year period doing that job, you just going to learn so much about people. You're going to learn so much about police work. So I think all cops look back on that first 5 to 10 years is probably the best part of their career. And I had the opportunity to not only be a patrol officer, but also in special enforcement situations. I worked a gang team for a couple of years. I worked in narcotics, did some training officer. And then you have what's called lateral duty. So I would do hostage negotiation at one point. Also, I was on the SWAT team. So, and it's not that unusual. I mean, police work is just very diverse, and it gives you an opportunity to do a lot of different things if you're really of a mindset that you want to really invest yourself in law enforcement. I would always find police officers who weren't happy at work, and they said they were just not happy. I go, well, try working. Because if you actually go out and do police work, if you go out and really talk to people and meet with people, and my thing as a sergeant is the one thing you can never say to a citizen is, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Because the fact of the matter is the police have so much available to them in terms of resources and support, that there's always something we can do. So it was a great career. I enjoyed every minute of it. I left 3 years early because I was somewhat conflicted about writing books about where I'd go out and talk about law enforcement as an individual, because I think the one thing I learned in 8 years in the Marines and 27 years in police work is 35 years is a long time to go without ever really saying what's on your mind. But that's what law enforcement is. That's what public service is. You stow your opinion off to the side and you accomplish the mission. So when I decided to start writing, and in fact published a book, and I was getting ready to publish another one, I decided just to leave a little bit early. But I enjoyed every minute of it.
Wow. Yeah. Making that transition from, are there parts of the old life, parts of your career that you miss? Do you miss the kind of adrenaline rush, or not so much anymore?
No, I was talking to a really good friend just a couple of days ago, and I could tell in his voice. I said, "What's up?" Because he says the passion's gone because of the way things are right now, because of the way the police are once again in the X. You know, they're being painted with a very broad brush, and this is a difficult time to be a cop, and he's just really worn out with it, and he was thinking about retirement. And he's old enough; he could retire. He could stop doing it. But I cautioned him, and I said, that's fine, but just understand there is nothing in your life like being a cop, because it is everything that people say it is. And the opportunity to go out, as I said, in a marked patrol car, or work as a detective specializing in serious crime, and to really help people and really solve people's problems, or to do work that is that rewarding. And I mean, look at the character of Ellie Peralta. The way she approaches her job is just, I think, so indicative of the way police work should be done. She just goes out and takes care of business, and she treats people fairly, but she gets the job done. So it's a great career, and there are a lot of different parts of it I miss. But it's also it's a young person's game. You know, once you promote to sergeant lieutenant, a lot of that allure is gone. So it's a little easier to walk away. You know, people always ask me, do you miss it? Well, do I miss being a 50-some-year-old lieutenant sitting behind a desk? Not a bit. Do I miss being a 27-year-old patrol cop? That's put me in a time machine, because I'll go back tomorrow.
Really?
I'll do that job anyhow. I mean that.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the great part of the work.
Do you find that obviously it has changed the way you look at the world forever? Compared to the normal citizen. I mean, your eyes are open in a way that someone like myself or just any civilian isn't. So, do you find that there's just sort of an instinctive muscle memory where you're always sizing up any given situation that you're in?
Yeah, and that still happens to a degree, probably not as much as it did the first year or so, but definitely, you do see the world through a different lens, and it's not always a good thing. Because you can be very judgmental, and people always you hear a lot of talk about profiling, and yeah, profiling can be done in a way that is unfair and prejudicial. But also, an effective profile is what you want your cops to be out there doing, to be effectively profiling a neighborhood or profiling a crime series. But yeah, I think that the downside of 25 years of police work can be that you do become jaded. It's not necessarily the case, but it does happen to a lot of cops, and it's something you got to fight against all the time. So again, that's something that I still try and train young officers in community colleges and police academies on the idea that you have to have a complete life. You have to have a life outside the department, because it can consume you, and every once in a while you got to take your pack off and just relax and spend time with the family.
When you were coming up, did you have the kind of the goal of becoming a cop first before becoming a writer, or was becoming a writer something you always kind of had in your back pocket that you wanted to do?
Well, I'm one of those 70s kids that read Joseph Wampel way before I should have. The New Centurion, I think in 1970 when it first came out. A funny story about that is that I went into the library and asked us to check out the book. I went into the adult section of the Eau Claire Public Library in Wisconsin and said I wanted to check out this new book called The New Centurions. And the librarian said, oh, no, you can't check that book out. That's adult fiction, and you won't be reading that. So I went home and told my dad, who I already talked about, and he's not for any form of censorship, so he checked it out for me. And I found out two things: is number one, listen to your librarians, because I had no business reading that book at 10 years old. But I also knew pretty much from that point forward that I had to be a cop. So I kind of got on a mindset very early in my life that I wanted to be a police officer. And I think probably Joe Wampaugh's probably tired of hearing that story because he hears it from a lot of cops wherever he goes. And he certainly has heard it from me when I had an opportunity to meet him. But yeah, I had the bug early for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean,
and then the writing came like that.
He really, influenced that whole template of the modern day police procedural.
For sure, he did. He's the godfather of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I know Michael Connolly, says that as well.
Yeah.
And you really get a sense, an outsider's look into some of the realities of being a cop, maybe that you wouldn't. Like I'm thinking of The Onion Field in particular, or some of those books where you see the stressors, you see how somebody unravels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other writers that were really influential to you?
Well, the one that's hopefully I'm sure he's just stuck in traffic or something. But yeah, I think most of the folks that might be watching that I encourage to be here, they know how I feel about Mr. Blake, about James Carlos. I picked up A World of Thieves a few years back in a discount pile, and was absolutely captivated by the story. And I can literally say I've read every book he's written, including the Wolf series, which is just fantastic. So he had a lot of influence. I just the way he writes the gritty sort of underbelly of crime in the American Southwest in any historical period just really captivated me. And I think when I created the character of Harlan Lee, my first bad guy, I think James Carlos was pretty much sitting on my shoulder, because I like the way he turns a character. And for instance, in this book, he does what he always does. He teases the story out by introducing characters that you're just absolutely enthralled with. You really get to know them well, and then he hits the gas and the chase is on. And literally the chase is on. He always writes a great chase scene and a great escapes, and sometimes not. Sometimes you never know if it's going to be a good ending or not with him.
He's done
so he had a great deal of influence.
He's done some. I'm hoping he's here because he's done some incredible water scenes in the last couple of books.
He has
the Rio Grande scene in the previous book, and then
yeah.
And this scene
that
in
was
the new
a
book.
scene too.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Yeah.
No, I just admire what he does so much, and with that multi-generational family saga.
Right.
He's been here a number of times, and it's funny in the event we did the other day with Ace Atkins and J. Todd Scott. I didn't realize you were watching. Sorry, until the very end, but we got off talking about Blake. Maybe this whole adds to his whole mystique.
For sure.
Having kind of the empty chair here. I'm having this horrible feeling. Do you think he thought it was 7 o'clock? Maybe. I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
Now I hope he's okay. I'm worried about that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But it's funny since we're talking about Blake. I first met him. 20 years ago, I think it was. He had that book, that incredible book that came out called In the Rogue Blood.
Yeah.
That came out, which was nominated for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize and everything. And I kind of got into him through that route, and then went back and read some of those books about historical outlaws, the Pistolier.
Wildwood Boys. Yeah.
Wildwood Boys. What a great book.
Yeah, great book. Yeah.
Yeah. Bloody.
No, he's a phenomenal chronicler of, like I said, of the irreverent American history that I think gets ignored at our peril. I think it's good to look at the underbelly sometimes, and nobody does it like him. He is quite, like I said, been a huge influence on me and Wampau, and of course Don Winslow out here in San Diego. He's such a gracious writer.
Absolutely.
And so willing to sit down and talk you through a story or through a frustration. Great friend and a great writer. So yeah, it's a great community. You know that. I mean, the writing community is just very supportive. I'd like to think that I've reached a point now that I'm able to mentor some emerging writers. It's always something I take a lot of pleasure in. But of course, the best thing is to when you can make that connection between the writer and the reader, and really just delve into that, the real power that comes from a well-told story. And I think that is the way that is our best form of connection to one another, is to share stories and to share personal experiences. And I think most writers would agree that when we sit down to write a book, that's really what we're trying to do, is connect ourselves to a larger world. And certainly that's, with this book, probably more than any other, with The Burden of Truth, this is a connection I really want to be able to make with people. And an interesting story, just a couple of days ago, I received an email from a reader who's already read the book, or a direct message on Facebook, and said that they were so touched by it that they were pondering it at the end, and then they read my author's note in the back of the book when I made a recommendation or I made the statement that I wish that police athletic leagues, which are such a great way to reach out to the community, and such a great way to get cops and young people in the community on the soccer field together, or the basketball court. And I said that I wish PAL would be funded with the same level of enthusiasm as local SWAT teams. And I know that it's not. Anyway, she was moved enough by that, and moved by the book, that she made a contribution to her local PAL organization. So I thought that was pretty cool. And that kind of connection is something that's just really rewarding to writers, to hear that.
Right. Yeah. Well, we actually do have a mutual friend in the writer Tammy Greenwood.
Yeah,
she's a good friend of yours, right?
Yes, she is.
Terrific.
She's a writing coach, actually.
Is that right?
Yeah, she's a terrific resource here in San Diego for hundreds of writers. We have this really cool nonprofit organization called San Diego Writers Inc. INK, and Tammy runs writing groups out of that. And in fact, Tammy's fingerprints are all over The Burden of Truth as well. She's known Omar since the very beginning. I've shared a lot of pages with her and people in her writing group. So I hope she's out there tonight. But yeah, she and I stay in close contact.
Yeah, she's a terrific writer. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let me see. I actually have a couple of questions that are sort of coming in. Let's see here. Yeah, Steve asks. It's a question about cops, and he says, ask him how these psycho cops get hired and stay hired. Why are they not fired even after multiple complaints? I'm sure you see some hotheads that get hired and kind of make their way through the system. Yeah,
and that's a fair question, no doubt about it. Particularly, I mean, in the ubiquitous days of the cell phone, I'm sure what we're seeing, it alarms me. And certainly, what happened in Minneapolis has just set the whole country on its ear. And I would just want to say this, though, and then I will talk about the issue of bad cops. There are 600,000 police officers in this country, about 650,000, and they answer somewhere between 30 and 50 million calls for service a year, interactions with the community, and literally 98.5% have no use of force whatsoever. They come off without a hitch, and then when there is a use of force, in most cases it is handled appropriately. But what's happening is there are these limited number of incidents that are so egregious and so beyond the pale that we end up with a situation where we feel like that's the norm in police work. So here's my answer to your question. I don't know that I would call Derek Chauvin a psycho, but he certainly was a terrible police officer. And in that particular case, there's no way to defend what he was doing to George Floyd. And I think he'll be held to answer for that in court. Should he have still been a police officer? I don't know what his personal record was. But I'll also say this about the 6-year veteran that was standing right next to him, had every opportunity to intervene. And that is something that police officers, all of them, all of us, need to get better at. And that is the immediate intervention when a call is going badly. And I think it would have probably just been a hand on his shoulder. Hey, we got this, man, get off his neck. And if that didn't work, shove him off his neck. And that was a failure. That was a failure. So yes, there are cops out there like Chauvin, and we need to be better at weeding them out. I fired plenty of cops. Cops get fired a lot. I think people would be surprised to realize just how often police officers, it's very rare for somebody to go 25 or 30 years in law enforcement. I'd say the average career is probably half that, mostly because of injury. Some people just can't take it anymore. but it's not uncommon at all that it's misconduct. So that does happen, but this is definitely one that probably should have been looked at a lot harder than he was.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, you hear a lot about, you know, people making the comment, you know, that cops are asked to be a lot of different roles. You know, they're asked to be social workers, they're asked to be amateur psychologists, they're asked all these different things. Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's some truth to that observation, that, you know, perhaps, you know, we're requiring too many different roles of them?
I think that was true. I recently reread the New Centurions, and I think that there's a lot of that sort of discussion in that book. Was written in 1970 and portrays the 1960s. So that's always been an issue with law enforcement. In fact, it's part of the job that really attracts men and women to be police officers, is the opportunity that every day is going to be different. That there really isn't a routine day in police work. But yeah, a lot has been heaped on, and certainly in the area of mental illness. In my entire career, this goes way back to, I'm sure people know, to the days of Ronald Reagan, where people just aren't going to be placed in institutions against their will. They have the right to live their lives. And so you have a lot of people on the streets that have a real difficult time staying in reality. And the first people that get called to that are the police. Now, a really innovative program in the department where I worked was having a police officer go out with a mental health clinician, and they would team up together. And all those sorts of calls would go to that particular pair of that particular car. And that was, I think, a move in the right direction. But again, it comes down to the kind of funding needed to support a program like that.
Yeah.
And we should do more of it.
Absolutely. Let's see. I have Jan here who's asked a couple of really good questions. Let's see here. Yeah, she asks if you would touch briefly on your writing process. You know, when do you write? Do you write on the computer? Do you write longhand? Do you have daily goals? What do you shoot for word-wise?
I think that question often comes up with people who are interested in becoming writers. I mean, the writing process is different for everyone, I think. For me, it's when I'm on my game, so to speak, and it has been a little bit more difficult nowadays with, I don't want to say the distractions, but life just feels differently for the last 90 days or so. But on a good day, on a good night, what I'll do is I'll finish up the last part of my day with 30 or 40 minutes of looking over the material that is most recent. But if I go to bed and get up at bright and early, 4:30 in the morning, which has always been my habit, and just avoid email, avoid the headlines, avoid newspapers, get a cup of coffee, and just jump right into the story. And that, for right now, I'm writing a prequel to an earlier novel. So the novel is set in 1970. So what that really means is that I got to be able to jump into the lives of characters from the 1970s and the era of the Vietnam War, and a whole different world of police work.
Wow.
So for me to do that effectively, I really just kind of have to just wall myself off. So if I do that from 4 to 10 o'clock every day, and I do it well, I can usually wind up with a couple thousand words that might make it all the way to the finish line.
Wow, that's great. I'm intrigued by this book. Which book is it a prequel to?
Well, if you remember Benefit of the Doubt, there was an old character in that book named Lars Norgard, and he's central to the story. He's central to the events that occurred. But since he had a stroke and was in a wheelchair, he could never communicate at all. So I just thought it would be interesting to fully form that character and make him a rookie police officer in 1970 on the Milwaukee Police Department. And what's really interesting is I had some friends, another writer, Adam Plantanka, I think he's been to your store, who worked for Milwaukee. And I asked him, hey, do you think you can hook me up with somebody? What does he find? He finds a retired gentleman from the Milwaukee Police Department who started there in 1970, who's got stories you wouldn't believe. So I'm having a lot of fun with it. And it's turning out to be an interesting novel. I'm looking forward to it.
You know, there was a really good, well, of course there have been a lot of good books written roughly during that time period, but there was one by a really, I think, underappreciated writer, a guy named Sam Reeves, and it was called Homicide 69.
Okay.
It's set in Chicago, big epic, set in Chicago in 1969. A real terrific book. And of course, George Pelicanos too has written some good ones during that time period as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Can you touch a little bit on? Let me see here. Ted asks. This is a good question. How was it that you chose Vista as the city of your current book? Was it the population makeup, the gangs? Was there something particular about that community?
Well, that's a good. I did want to write it fiction true to life. I wanted it to be a real location with a real organization. I wasn't going to write it about the police department I worked for, which was the Escondido Police Department. That's just way too close to home. Yeah. But I did want it to be in North County, and I wanted it to be a large enough organization that that it would be fairly anonymous, right? So it was the San Diego Police Department or the San Diego Sheriff's Office. And I'm much more familiar up here in what's called North County, San Diego, the Sheriff's Office. So I needed a city about the size of Vista with a very diverse population and kind of an urban core, if you will. And I needed it to be controlled by the Sheriff's Office. So Vista was the logical choice. And I think people, in Vista will. I think they'll take the book to heart. Vista does have a rocky history. Not so much lately, but they certainly have a rocky history with the Sheriff's Office. So I think that this book will ring true to the people that live in that area.
Where exactly is Vista?
It's north inland San Diego, probably about 10 miles inland from the ocean, and about 30 to 35 miles north of downtown San Diego.
Okay. All right, so near like Del Mar area, or?
Inland, but near there, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's cool. Let me see here. Well, some of these we've touched on some of these other questions. Can you talk a little bit about? I know that sort of thus far the two worlds that we know that you write about are Wisconsin and California, different parts of California. In your experience, is law enforcement the same no matter where you go, or does the region impose its own rules or its own flavor?
Yeah, I'll say this for sure. I'm very comfortable about it. The Southwest United States, Southern California, Arizona, Nevada. This is probably the highest level of police training, I think, in the country. The academies, the field training requirements, the continuing professional training requirements. There's still plenty of places in the country where you can get hired on as a police officer, 20, 21 years of age, and be out working independently in a matter of weeks. I don't think that's a particularly good idea, but it still happens not infrequently throughout the country. I don't want to bag on any particular region, but in this part of the country, I think the police officers are trained probably as well as they are anywhere else in the country.
Do you have? I mean, you're not a spokesperson for law enforcement, but I mean, do you have a take on just this whole prison for profit kind of climate that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, well, see, and again, that's quite, you're right. But now, in my position as a retired police officer, as a writer, I love an opportunity to talk about that sort of thing. And yeah, I've heard it referred to as a prisoner production. And I think it's a very dangerous line that we've crossed when we're in a situation where prisoners are a profit-driven commodity. It's not new. I mean, this is something that in a wonderful book by, I believe his name was Blackman, Slavery by Another Name. This was something that, the whole using prisoners for labor was something that goes back into the 1920s and 30s. But now with the idea of prisons being privatized, and that maybe the people that lobby for those prisons are anxious to make sure that there's a continual replenishment of their product, which is human beings. So yeah, I think it's a dangerous line that we've crossed. But I'm not sure what the recent legislation is in California, but I know that's being addressed. I don't think we're going to have for-profit prisons in California.
it's certainly, you know, one of the worst. Arizona is one of the worst offenders in that realm.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, from what I hear. Yeah. Let's see, what time are... Boy. Now I'm a little bit worried about Mr. Blake.
Yeah, I hope he's all right. We emailed today back and forth, and he said, "See you tonight, amigo." So I hope he's fine. I'm sure he is.
I hope maybe it's just a car problem, but anyway. It's interesting. The other night we had, I don't know if you happened to catch it, but I had a really fun conversation with Joe Lansdale, who's
I didn't see that one.
One of my favorite people and a terrific writer. And you know, we were talking about just sort of this bizarre time that we're all living in right now, and you know, and of you know, the whole country being divided the way we are and polarized and all this sort of thing. And he, you know, Lansdale was saying, you know, I really believe in the American dream, you know, in the sense that he came from very humble, you know, poor family in East Texas, and kind of hard scrabble. His dad was a mechanic, and you know, he came up and as a writer and really, you know, achieved that, what we would call the American dream. But his full quote is, "I believe in the American dream, but I also know that it isn't available to everyone." And that's the big kind of systemic problem. You know? That's certainly
that's a great quote, because, you know, I mean, when I do look at the life of Omar Ortega, and it's funny you say you like the title of the book, and so do I, The Burden of Truth. This book, when it was ruminating in my mind for so many years, it was always the Book of Omar, because this book is all about Omar Ortega. And, you know, so little has been gifted to him in his life, whether you want to call it birthright, or you want to call it privilege, or you want to call it just good fortune. So little of it was provided to him through no fault of his own. But then, you know, in the life of Travis's children, for instance, you know, I remember at one point his young son got himself busted for shoplifting.
Right.
But Travis was able to take care of that for him.
Yep.
Because that's just the kind of, you know, that's the kind of, for lack of a better, not probably a good word for it, but the privilege that comes with, you know, being someone that your parents can look out for you like that. So yeah, I think that, you know, what's sad is how close Omar came to being able to reach out and grab a hold of the brass ring. He was right there, and it only took one night and one car ride to send all that down the drain. And when your life is that much of a zero-sum game, I really think that, and again, through no fault of his, just the circumstances that he was born into. It is true that it's not as immediately available to everyone, particularly young men like him.
Right. Well, what else do you have going on? You have the this novel you're working on that's set in 1970.
Yeah.
And any plans beyond that, or is that?
You know, I'm sure something will come up. I've had a great relationship now with Forge for going on 5 years. This is our 4th book together. They'll be taking care of the 5th one as well, and it's just been a great relationship. Forge is just a really supportive environment. I've been looking forward to this, the opportunity to get out and talk with people about Omar. This is the best we can do for now, but I mean it sincerely, Patrick, to you and Barbara, and to everyone at the Poison Pen. We all appreciate it so much that you guys have got this down in terms of the production. So this has been great, and I really like I like the opportunity to get out and talk to folks about this particular story. So I'll keep working on the next one, but I hope that we can keep talking about Omar for a while, and we'll just take it from there.
Absolutely. Now, just on a, then we'll kind of take it in for a landing here. You know, we talked about this bizarre era that we're in right now, and I've talked to many writers, you know, and how are you dealing with it, you know, and a lot of them have made the comment that, you know, I've really had to limit my exposure to the news. You know, I've had to do a couple of things like that. And that's certainly been true for me. You know, I've been you know, watching too much of that stuff. It's not good for my mental stability. You know, I've had to really kind of dial it back and just you know, try to be as careful as I can. But it's a strange time.
That's the truth, and that's why I say I really I'm conflicted with the whole issue of social media, because it's been so great, being active on Facebook and connecting with old friends from high school, friends from the Marines, staying in touch with the police officers that I worked with. But then again, there's just such a toxic fact that you can get sucked into. So, and that's why I say, I don't know about you, but it can ruin my day if the first thing I do is get up in the morning and start clicking around the newspapers or social media, and my mind's just blown. So what I try and do is, as a writer, in these particularly volatile times, if you will, not only in terms of the pandemic, but just the nature of our national discord right now. I really do try and inject myself in the story. I mean, I always love the quote from Sylvester Stallone, who said he owes all his success to his great friend Rocky Balboa. And it takes a minute to remember, wait a minute, Rocky's not real, but I can guarantee you he's real to Stallone. And that's how I try and, just kind of surround myself with my imaginary friends, the characters in the stories. And the more successful I am at doing that, the more successful I am at and putting myself into December of 1969, the more satisfaction I feel as a writer. But when I do come up for air, I'm as guilty as anyone that I try and take it in small doses and be thankful for the things that we do have. And we're pretty fortunate here. We've my wife's able to work from home. We have a daughter who's going to go off to Santa Clara University, but their class size is so small that they're going to try and do it on campus. Our son is zooming into high school, which is disappointing. But all in all, we're in good health, and we're pretty fortunate.
That's great. Yeah, my wife is, she just started, she's going to be starting classes. She's a high school teacher, teaches math and science, and they're trying to figure it out as they go along. They're going to be doing Zoom for a little while, and we'll see. But hey, so we've run a little bit late here, but hey, Neal, it's been just a real delight to talk.
I appreciate it, Patrick. Good seeing you again.
And we'll try to track down Mr. Blake and see where he is.
Let me know. And seriously, whatever the technical issue was, I really appreciate your pushing through that, because it's been a great connection, at least on my end. So
it looks terrific.
Yeah. So that was a real effort on your part. So thanks everybody for stopping by and tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you again soon, and maybe at the Poison Pen next year. That'd be wonderful.
Well, maybe if we can reschedule Blake, maybe we'll get him to embrace the Zoom world. And if we do, would you be interested in participating?
Always, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure he's fine. He'll come rolling in any second now. You tell him I said howdy.
Yeah. Wasn't it 8 o'clock, man? No.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thanks again so much, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Patrick.
As always.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you all very much for tuning in. Take care.
Good night.
All right.